Hi everyone, this is Drew from SkinnyArtist.com, and welcome to the video podcast of What the Heck is Creative Commons Licensing and Why Should I Care? Chances are, if you've spent any amount of time online hanging out with the artsy crowd, you've probably heard people talking about Creative Commons licensing and how all the cool kids seem to be using it to protect and market their creative work online. And even though you probably never admitted to them, you might not have known exactly what they were talking about. Now, if you've been in the creative game for a while, you've probably already familiar with the concept behind copyright, and chances are you most likely used it to protect your own creative work from someone coming along and passing it off as their own. Now, with traditional copyright, you are reserving all rights for yourself, which means that technically nobody is allowed to do anything with your work without your permission. However, as you already know, people love to share things online. So not too long ago, some very smart people came up with the idea of Creative Commons licensing. Now, while traditional copyright prohibits you from doing virtually anything with the creator's work without his or her permission, Creative Commons license gives people permission to use a work in a specific way without having to contact the creator of that work. Creative Commons license is not really an alternative to traditional copyright. Instead, they work together and they allow you to define exactly what you do and do not want people to do with your creative work. In other words, you're giving away some of your rights in order to encourage people to share your creative work while still retaining most of your legal rights. So with Creative Commons licenses, you keep your copyright, but you share your creativity. Now, when we decide to put a Creative Commons license on our work, it's important that we understand exactly what rights we're giving away and which ones we're keeping for ourselves. Now, essentially, there are 6 different Creative Commons licenses that we can use in our work. Now, before we get into the specific licenses, however, we need to talk a little bit about some of the icon symbols that are used in the individual license. The first icon here is simply our Creative Commons icon, which is included in all the individual licenses. It just means that, hey, this isn't your ordinary copyright, so pay attention and listen to what rights that I'm giving you. The second icon is usually called the attribution or the by icon, and it's also included in all the Creative Commons licenses. It essentially means that anyone is allowed to copy, distribute, or perform your creative work as long as they give you credit for it. The third icon is known as the non-commercial or the NC icon. It comes both in a dollar and a euro version. Now, keep in mind that these are globally recognized icons, so even if a country does not use these particular currencies, the non-commercial designation is still in effect. Now, when you include this icon in your Creative Commons license, you're saying that anyone is allowed to copy and share your creative work as long as they're not selling it or making money from it. The fourth icon is known as the non-derivative or the ND icon. This is just a fancy way of saying that anyone is allowed to copy and share your creative work as long as they don't change it in any way. In other words, if they want to make any changes to your original work, they have to get your permission first. Now, the fifth icon is known as the share alike or the SA icon. This means that you're not only allowing others to copy and share your work, but they can also change your work as long as they distribute any modified work on the same terms. In other words, they're not allowed to modify your work and then turn around and put a traditional all rights reserved copyright on it. They have to distribute their modified work under the same terms that you did originally. Now, as far as the Creative Commons licenses themselves, it might help to think of them as being on a kind of continuum that goes from the most restrictive to the least restrictive, where on one side you have the all rights reserved of the traditional copyright, and on the other side you have the no rights reserved, do whatever you want with it, public domain license. Now, the 6 Creative Commons licenses kind of bridge this gap in between. Now, simply for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through and read each one of these individually. However, I have created a PDF file that contains all of this information that you can download and print out for yourself. So by now you're probably thinking, all right, that's great, but how exactly do I put a Creative Commons license on my website? After all, choosing what kind of Creative Commons license you want is only the first step. It's not going to do you any good unless the people viewing your content know that it's there. In other words, you have to clearly mark your content with the Creative Commons license, just as you would with any type of traditional copyright notice. Now let's take a closer look at how all this works by using this very attractive website as an example. Now there are of course several ways that you can add a Creative Commons license to your website, and we'll talk about a couple of them. But probably the easiest way is simply to put a notice in the footer or the sidebar of your website with the Creative Commons license icon, along with a link that explains what that particular license allows. Including this link is important since the vast majority of the people looking at your work are probably not going to know what a BYNC-ND Creative Commons license means off the top of their head. But if they click the link, however, they'll be taken to a web page that clearly explains exactly what they're allowed to do and not. Now, maybe you don't want to put a Creative Commons license on everything that's on your website. Maybe you just want to put it on a few individual pieces, and you can do that as well. So say you're a photographer who wants to post a few of your images online so people can see what a great photographer you really are. Now, because you're not trying to sell the prints of these particular images, you don't really mind if other people share them or use them on their website, as long as they credit you as the photographer and they don't try to sell them themselves. So let's say that after considering the different choices, you decide that you want to use a BYNC Creative Commons license for this particular image. Now, instead of putting the notice in the footer or the sidebar of the website, you would place the license icon underneath the individual image along with a link that explains what this license allows and does not allow. That way, if someone wants to use this particular image on their blog, but they don't know if they're allowed to, they can click on the link and see that you have given them permission to do so, as long as you are credited as the photographer. Now, obviously, we only have time to cover the very basics of Creative Commons licensing here in this video, but if you'd like to find out more, I'd really encourage you to check out the Foundation's website at creativecommons.org, where you'll be able to find much more in-depth information. You can also go there to download all of the buttons and icons that you'll need to mark your work with the Creative Commons license. Just go to creativecommons.org about/downloads, and you'll be able to download any of the icons individually, or you can even get them all at one time in a zip file. Now, there's also a nice licensing wizard on their site that will help you decide which Creative Commons license to choose and then provide you with all of the HTML code that you'll need to put it on your website. Let's say, for example, that you're a writer and you'd like to put a Creative Commons license on your new short story that you're about to post online. You would simply answer a few questions, fill out your name as well as the links to your website, and then hit the Select a License button. You'll then be given the appropriate license badge as well as all of the information that you need to properly mark your work. You can then either cut and paste this information directly onto your work, say if you were publishing your story as a PDF file, or you can use the created HTML code to post the information directly onto your website. Now, the last point I want to mention here is a question that a lot of people have about Creative Commons, which is, what happens if I change my mind later? Well, free publicity and viral sharing on the internet are great ways to get your name out there as a creative artist. However, you have to keep in mind that if your financial livelihood depends on you controlling the copyright of your creative work, you really need to consider what rights you're giving away, as well as how that may affect you down the road. One thing that you have to understand is that all Creative Commons licenses are non-revocable, which means that you can't stop someone from using your work according to the Creative Commons license that it was originally released on, even if you change your mind later. In other words, once you put a Creative Commons license on a particular work, you cannot take it back later and then grant exclusive rights to someone else. Now, keep in mind, you can always remove a Creative Commons license anytime. But like anything else on the internet, once you put something out there, it's out there forever. So if someone finds a copy of your work 10 years later with your old Creative Commons license still attached, they'll be able to use it according to the terms of that license. This really isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just something that I think you need to be aware of going into it. All right, that's all I got for you. Now, if you have any more questions or comments about Creative Commons, feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. Finally, as you can see, both this video and the PDF reference sheet have been released under a Creative Commons license, so feel free to share it and pass it along. Once again, this is Drew from SkinnyArtist.com. Thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.